On the edge of Cedar Hollow, beneath a sky bruised by storm and hope, a single haunting howl slices through the night, echoing from a house where secrets fester behind locked doors. What would you do if the cries of an innocent soul shattered your sleep, begging for help no one else could hear? Tonight, a young boy must choose: ignore the darkness or risk everything to follow the voice of compassion. Would you be brave enough to listen? Tell us in the comments and stay with us. The journey ahead will touch your heart in ways you never imagined. Sergeant Harris was a legend in Cedar Hollow. In his early 50s, he had the presence of someone who once stood tall in the world, though now his posture was stooped and his face worn. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with thick gray hair cropped close to his head, deep-set eyes, and a jaw that had seen its share of stubbornness. Harris had served in the town's police department for over 20 years, known for his unwavering sense of duty and occasional gruffness. Since his wife's passing several years ago and his early retirement following a traumatic incident on the force, he had kept to himself. Some said grief had changed him, made him harder, more unpredictable. Others insisted he was just private, a good man bearing wounds nobody saw. Harris's only companion was Rocky, a German shepherd nearly 6 years old, a true working dog with sharp amber eyes and a thick black and tan coat now dulled by neglect. Once, Rocky had been the pride of the K-9 unit, celebrated for his intelligence and loyalty. But lately, neighbors whispered, Rocky was rarely seen. Sometimes Harris could be glimpsed walking the dog late at night, both of them shadows moving through the frost. After dinner, Ethan unpacked his few precious things: a stack of well-thumbed adventure books, a battered notebook, and a shoebox of treasures, and claimed the upstairs room facing Harris's house. He opened the window a crack, letting in the cold, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house as his parents settled Grandma Jean into the guest room across the hall. The sky was a deepening blue, and the lake beyond glimmered with reflected porch lights. For a while, Ethan lay awake, shivering in anticipation of tomorrow. A new school, new faces, the promise and threat of new beginnings. Sometime after midnight, Ethan jerked awake, heart pounding. At first he thought he'd been dreaming, but then he heard it, a low, guttural sound, rising and falling, scraping against the silence like a wound. It wasn't the wind, nor the groan of old pipes. Ethan slipped from his bed, tiptoed to the window, and peered out. The house next door was nearly dark, but in the pale glow of the street lamp, he could make out the faint outline of Rocky pressed up against the back fence. The sound, a mix of whimper and howl, drifted through the night air, raw and aching. There was something about it that made Ethan's chest tighten, a desperation that words could not name. The noise stopped suddenly, replaced by the slap of a door and the sharp, muffled bark of a man's voice, Harris's voice, hoarse and angry. Ethan ducked down, pulse quickening. He waited, breath held, until all was quiet again. In the hallway, a faint shuffle announced Grandma Jean, up wandering as she often did. Ethan crept out to check on her. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, eyes distant but alert, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Couldn't sleep, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice wavering but kind. "There was a sound," Ethan whispered, "from next door. It didn't sound right." Jean's eyes focused, a flicker of her old self shining through. "Sometimes things cry out to be heard, even when no one wants to listen. When I was a girl, we had a neighbor who kept a dog chained up outside. People said it was just a dog, but I knew better. Every creature carries a secret in its heart, Ethan. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to listen." She smiled, squeezed his hand, then drifted back into her world of faded songs. Ethan lingered at the window, watching as snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, swallowing the lights and sounds of Cedar Hollow. He pressed his palm to the glass and made a silent promise to listen, to notice, and maybe, just maybe, to help. The wind was sharp and restless in Cedar Hollow that March, as if the whole town were being scrubbed clean by the lingering breath of winter. Icy flecks danced in the headlights as the Miller family's battered Subaru wound its way through sleepy tree-lined streets, passing clusters of snow piled by the curb, the lawns still half frozen, the houses modest and stoic in the fading afternoon light. Their new home waited at the corner of Lakeview Avenue, a pale blue bungalow with white trim, squat and sturdy, one maple tree arching over the porch like a watchful old friend. Cedar Hollow, nestled by a wide gray lake in northern Minnesota, felt a world away from the bustling suburb where the Millers had lived before. Here, the silence was different. It was heavy, pressing in after dusk, punctuated only by the wind and the distant creak of old wood. It was a silence that invited secrets. Ethan Miller pressed his face to the cool glass of the backseat window, his breath fogging the pane. At 11 years old, he was skinny, all elbows and knees, with a mop of reddish-brown hair that refused to obey any comb. His face was splattered with the last freckles of childhood, and his blue eyes were wide, curious, a little haunted. Ethan had always been a watcher, a boy who listened for things that others missed, who saw stories in shadows and shapes in clouds. He wore an old army green jacket, much too big for him, that had once belonged to his dad in college. It hung on him like borrowed armor. That night, as the family hauled boxes through the sharp wind and into the empty house, Ethan barely noticed the chill. He was too busy surveying his new kingdom, searching for secrets. Inside, Sarah Miller moved with the brisk efficiency of a woman used to carrying too much. Sarah was in her late 30s, taller than most women in Cedar Hollow, with shoulders squared by years of lifting, groceries, boxes, patience. She had a straight posture and a kind but determined mouth, framed by hair that she always kept pulled back in a sensible bun. Sarah was a registered nurse, a fact that gave her an aura of practicality and calm. People relied on Sarah, her friends, her co-workers, and lately her own mother, whose memory was beginning to flicker and fade like an old movie reel. There was an edge of worry always lurking in Sarah's eyes, a wariness that softened only in rare, private moments. Still, she greeted the new house with an air of stubborn optimism. "We'll make it cozy in no time," she promised, setting a battered box on the kitchen counter and glancing over her shoulder at Ethan, who trailed behind her. Michael Miller, Ethan's father, followed with an armload of coats. He was a high school English teacher, shorter and stockier than Sarah, with graying hair and a gentle, distracted air, as though his mind always hovered a step away from the present. Michael wore wire-rimmed glasses and an easy smile that had survived long years of late nights grading papers. He believed in stories and small miracles, and in his family's ability to adapt, even when the world turned unpredictable. Last to enter was Grandma Jean, Sarah's mother. Jean had once been a music teacher, her hands graceful and expressive, her laughter bright enough to fill a room. But now, in her 70s, she was thin and bird-like, her white hair pulled back in a loose braid. Her eyes, a sharp blue like Ethan's, sometimes clouded with confusion, but on other days sparkled with mischief and old wisdom. She walked slowly, one hand steadying herself on her grandson's shoulder, the other clutching a soft plaid blanket she refused to part with. Though the fog of forgetfulness often settled over her, there were moments when Jean's old warmth and kindness broke through, when she'd reach for Ethan's hand and whisper stories about bravery, kindness, and the hidden places of the human heart. As the sun set behind the lake, throwing long gold bars across the floorboards, the Millers gathered around the kitchen table for their first dinner in the new house, takeout pizza on paper plates. Ethan hardly tasted his food. Through the window, he studied the house next door, a larger, weathered Victorian with peeling paint and a yard half swallowed by snowdrifts. The porch light flickered on, revealing a hulking silhouette moving behind the curtain. That was the home of Sergeant Victor Harris. Spring's promise was slow to reach Cedar Hollow, and the wind still bit at Ethan's cheeks as he walked home from his new school backpack slapping against his thin frame. The sky hung heavy and gray above the town, the kind of cold that clung to your bones and made you hurry between patches of sunlight. As he approached his house, Ethan's eyes strayed, as they always did, to the weathered Victorian next door. The yard was a mess of tangled brown grass and ice-rimmed puddles, but it was Rocky who drew Ethan's attention, a dark shape near the back steps lying in a patch of dirty snow. Rocky, the once proud German shepherd, looked worse than ever. His thick fur was now patchy, his ribs showing through, and as Ethan watched the dog struggle to rise, moving stiffly favoring one hind leg. There was a raw patch on his shoulder, a red wound that hadn't healed. Sergeant Harris stood on the porch arms folded tight across his broad chest, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a faded ball cap. His body was still strong, but his features were harder now, mouth set in a thin, angry line. There was something about the way he watched Rocky, a mix of impatience and resentment, that made Ethan's stomach twist. The sergeant barked a command, his voice harsh and clipped. Rocky flinched, ears flat, and limped inside as soon as the door creaked open. Ethan ducked his head and hurried through the gate to his own yard. His mother, Sarah, was at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of mail. She looked tired. There were new lines on her face, and her bun was coming loose. Yet her voice was gentle as she greeted Ethan. "Long day," she asked, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Before Ethan could answer, Grandma Jean shuffled in, wrapped in her plaid blanket, humming a tune that sounded like a memory. Her gaze drifted to the window. "The air feels heavy today," she murmured. "There's a darkness in that house, just like the old tales." Sarah touched her mother's hand, a flicker of concern passing between them. Later, as twilight settled, Ethan slipped outside again. The world was quieter now. Only the calls of distant geese and the crunch of his shoes in the damp grass broke the stillness. He crept to the fence that separated their yard from Sergeant Harris's and crouched low, heart pounding. Rocky was there, pressed up against the boards, watching Ethan with wide, haunted eyes. The dog's muzzle was graying, and old scars traced his flanks. When Ethan whispered, "Hey, boy, it's okay, I brought you something." He reached carefully through a gap in the boards, holding out a dog biscuit and a small bottle of water. Rocky sniffed the air but didn't move. His tail didn't wag. Instead, he pressed himself harder against the fence as if wishing he could vanish into the wood. Ethan set the biscuit and water down, watching the dog with growing worry. He could see now that Rocky was trembling, every muscle tensed, as if expecting a blow. Just then, a door slammed. Harris's voice cut through the quiet sharp with irritation. "Rocky, get back here." The dog jerked away, vanishing into the shadows, and Ethan scurried back to his porch, heart racing with guilt and fear. That night, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Ethan's mind was miles away. Sarah tried to draw him out, asking about school, but his answers were short. Grandma Jean, for once, was quiet, her eyes fixed on the window, as if she could see through the dark to the house next door. "Something's wrong with that dog," she said, suddenly breaking the silence. "I can feel it." Michael, pouring gravy on his potatoes, looked up, frowning. "Jean, maybe you should rest." But Sarah nodded slowly. "I've noticed it too. Rocky's not looked well since we moved in. Maybe we should check on him." Ethan's heart leapt at his mother's words, but he forced himself to eat, knowing the adults might never see what he saw. Days passed. The weather grew milder, and the snow in Cedar Hollow finally began to retreat. But Rocky's condition only worsened. Ethan watched through his window in the mornings, and after school, seeing the dog limp across the yard, always alone, always wary. Sometimes when Harris left for town, Ethan would slip out with a handful of biscuits or an apple slice. He'd whisper encouragement through the fence, leaving treats in the same spot. But Rocky remained fearful sometimes, backing away other times, just staring with wide, miserable eyes. Once Ethan glimpsed a deep scratch on Rocky's side, raw and red, as if scraped by something sharp. The image haunted him. One Saturday, Sarah suggested they all walk to the town's tiny farmer's market. It was a rare warm day, and Sarah hoped some fresh air would do them good. Grandma Jean walked with them, her arm through Michael's, humming softly. The market was set up near the lake in a clearing of sun-dappled grass. Stalls overflowed with apples, homemade soap, and jars of honey. Neighbors greeted each other, laughter floating on the breeze. There Ethan met Noah, a boy his own age, from down the street. Noah had tan skin, a quick, crooked smile, and a spray of dark curls under his baseball cap. He was friendly and curious, asking Ethan about his old home, about the books he read, and most importantly, about the dog next door. "Harris's dog used to be a hero," Noah confided. "My dad said Rocky caught a thief once, saved a little kid. Now, though, nobody sees him much. They say Harris changed after his wife died." Ethan listened closely, feeling the weight of the town's secrets settling on his shoulders. After they returned home, Ethan saw Harris in his yard, filling a metal bowl with something from a can. He barked at Rocky to come, but when the dog limped over, Harris set the bowl down roughly, then went back inside without a glance. Rocky sniffed the food, but ate only a little, his body hunched and wary. Ethan's hands balled into fists. He wanted to yell to demand Harris treat Rocky better, but fear kept him silent. Instead, he decided to write everything down. Every wound, every limp, every night, Rocky cried out in the darkness. One evening, after Sarah tucked Ethan into bed, she sat in the dim light with Grandma Jean. Jean's mind was clearer tonight, and she looked at her daughter with grave intensity. "You have to pay attention, Sarah. There's a shadow over that house, a hurt that won't heal. Sarah squeezed her mother's hand, troubled by the older woman's certainty. Later, Sarah stood at Ethan's door and watched her son sleep, wondering if her mother's fears were only the product of a fading mind, or if they all were missing something important. On Sunday, Ethan woke before dawn, restless and uneasy. He slipped outside, tiptoeing past the creaky porch swing, and made his way to the fence. Rocky was there, huddled in a patch of mud, shivering. Ethan crouched down, voice trembling. "Hang in there, boy. I'll figure something out." As he reached through the fence, Rocky startled and scrambled away, disappearing into the shadows near the garage. Ethan's chest ached with helplessness. Back inside, the house was stirring. Grandma Jean stood by the kitchen window, staring at the neighbor's yard, her reflection pale and ghostly in the glass. "Not all monsters hide in fairy tales," she whispered, as if she knew his thoughts. Ethan nodded, making a silent vow. He wouldn't stop watching. He wouldn't let Rocky disappear into silence. The sky over Cedar Hollow that night was a velvet shroud thick with clouds that seemed to press down on the quiet streets. It was just past midnight when Ethan sat up in bed, his heart thudding with the heavy sense that something was wrong. The wind rattled the loose pane in his window, and somewhere beyond the dark, a dog's whimper threaded through the silence, a sound so faint and mournful that it seemed to echo inside his chest. He slid out of bed, careful not to wake Grandma Jean, sleeping across the hall, and crept through the moonlit house, breath held, as he eased open the back door. The air outside was sharp and wet, carrying the faint metallic scent of rain and earth. Ethan tiptoed across the yard, his sneakers barely making a sound on the patchy grass, and slipped through the old gap in the fence. He crouched low, heart pounding, as he made his way to the shadows at the back of Sergeant Harris's property. The old shed stood apart from the house, a squat wooden structure with peeling red paint and a slanted tin roof that rattled with every gust. Tonight, a thin sliver of light glowed beneath the door. Ethan pressed himself against the side, willing himself to be invisible. Inside, Sergeant Harris's voice broke the night's hush, low and sharp, each word carrying a charge of anger. "Stupid mutt! Can't you even stand straight?" There was a harsh clatter, the thud of something striking flesh. Ethan flinched. Through a crack in the wood, he could just make out Rocky cowering against the wall, his tail-tucked ears, flattened eyes round with terror. The German shepherd's body shook with every word Harris spat, and when the man raised his hand, large, calloused, trembling with rage, Ethan saw him strike Rocky with the flat of his palm, then shove the dog to the ground. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, and he felt cold all over. He wanted to shout to throw open the door and rescue Rocky right then, but fear nailed his feet to the earth. Harris muttered more curses, then finally stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled. As the footsteps faded toward the house, Rocky whimpered a broken, desperate sound. Ethan pressed his hand to the wood in silent apology, then slipped away, tears stinging his eyes. Back in his room, Ethan curled under the covers, shivering with anger and sorrow. The images replayed behind his eyelids the way Harris's hand struck the way. Rocky cowered and didn't fight back. At breakfast, the house was filled with the scent of oatmeal and the soft clink of spoons. Sarah, Ethan's mother, stood by the stove in her faded blue sweater, her hair swept back in a messy bun, eyes heavy with the weight of restless sleep. She was tall and slender, her movements quiet and thoughtful, as if always carrying some hidden burden. Ethan's father, Michael, broad-shouldered with a warm baritone voice, sat at the table with the newspaper. He was gentle and steady, the sort of man neighbors trusted, but sometimes too logical for the magic and pain Ethan tried to describe. Ethan picked at his food, his mind circling the horrors of the night. He cleared his throat, voice trembling. "I saw something last night. Harris hurt Rocky. He was yelling at him and hitting him in the shed." Rocky looked so scared Michael lowered the paper, surprise and concern etched on his face. "Are you sure, son? Maybe you misunderstood. Harris is a police officer. He trains that dog and no dad." Ethan insisted, knuckles white on his fork. It wasn't training. He was hurting him. Sarah came to sit beside Ethan, her presence calm and grounding. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers gentle. "Tell me exactly what you saw." "Ethan," she said softly. He described every detail, the shed, the blows, the fear in Rocky's eyes. Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah, a flicker of doubt shadowing his features. "Ethan, I know you care about that dog, but sometimes what we see in the dark, I know what I saw." Ethan snapped more forcefully than he intended. Sarah reached for his hand, her grip warm and reassuring. Sometimes she said quietly, "Pain leaves marks we don't always see right away." "I believe you saw something, sweetheart. It's just, Harris has been a respected officer for years. People may not believe you right away." Ethan's anger faded into frustration and despair. "But Rocky needs help. We have to do something." Sarah nodded a quiet strength in her gaze. "We will, I promise. But first, we need to be sure. Keep your eyes open. Sometimes helping means waiting for the right moment." Her words offered a flicker of hope, and Ethan clung to it, though it felt paper thin. Later that day, Ethan wandered outside, lost in thought. He sat on the back steps, head in his hands, when Noah appeared tossing a baseball in one hand. Noah's presence was a small comfort. Quick-witted and full of restless energy, he always seemed to know when Ethan needed a friend. "You look like someone just kicked your puppy," Noah said, sitting beside him. Ethan glanced up, hesitated, then told him everything he'd seen. Noah's eyes widened. "That's messed up. But who's gonna believe us? Harris is like the town hero. My dad said he caught a bank robber once." Ethan shook his head. "Rocky's not safe. I have to find a way to prove it." As the afternoon faded, Ethan watched the neighbor's yard through the slats in the fence. Harris was outside washing his old patrol car, his movement's mechanical jaw set hard. Rocky stayed on the porch, unmoving, flinching at every sharp sound. The air was tense like the hush before a storm. That evening, as dusk fell, Sarah joined Ethan in his room. She sat on the edge of his bed, brushing her fingers across the faded quilt Grandma Jean had made years ago. Sarah's face was lined with fatigue, but her eyes were kind and determined. "You know, Ethan, I grew up in a house with secrets. My father, he wasn't always gentle. People didn't see it, but the pain was real." She squeezed his hand. "Every hurt leaves a mark, even if it's hidden. Sometimes it takes courage just to tell the truth." Her story surprised Ethan, and for a moment he saw her not as just his mother, but as someone who understood darkness, someone who had survived it. "We'll help Rocky, Ethan," she whispered. "But we have to be smart. Watch for signs. Write down what you see. If anyone asks, we'll have the truth." Encouraged, Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. He began a notebook that night, recording every limp, every fresh wound, every strange outburst from Harris. It became his secret evidence proof for the day when someone would finally listen. Meanwhile, life in Cedar Hollow churned on. The neighbors were busy with their routines, unaware of the heartbreak unfolding just next door. Sarah carrying her own scars, but choosing kindness every day, became more watchful too. Grandma Jean, sensing Ethan's worry, told him even the strongest hearts bruise, darling. But hope is stubborn. The pain of the discovery became a quiet fire inside Ethan, fueling his determination. If no one else would help Rocky, then he would. He would be the one to listen, to believe, and when the moment came, to act. The early autumn sun was just beginning to warm the rooftops of Cedar Hollow when Ethan awoke, the chill of last night's event still lingering in his bones. The trees along Maple Lane glimmered with golden leaves, but their beauty seemed distant and fragile in the face of what he knew. Ethan stared at his notebook now, half filled with entries about Rocky dates, times, sketches of wounds, scribbled fragments of Sergeant Harris's outbursts, all haunted by the memory of that terrified dog in the shed. Determined, Ethan sought out Sam early that Saturday. Sam was a wiry, quick-footed boy with wild sandy hair and a laugh that could lighten the gloomiest afternoon. Despite his careless attitude toward homework and shoes, Sam was fiercely loyal, and his keen curiosity made him the perfect partner for any secret mission. When Ethan found him kicking a soccer ball alone by the swing set, Sam barely paused. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, catching the ball under his foot with practiced ease. Ethan drew him aside and whispered the story of what he'd seen, the blows, the fear, the silence from the adults. Sam's face grew serious. "You really saw him do it, I swear," Ethan said. "Rocky needs help, and if no one believes me, we need proof." Sam grinned with mischief and resolve. "So, we're going detective on this." He pulled from his backpack an old handheld recorder, one of those relics his dad used for dictation in his home office, now sticky with old stickers and half-faded pen marks. They slipped through the backyard and knelt in the shadow of the fence, hearts pounding as they threaded the recorder through a gap and wedged it securely under a pile of leaves close to Harris's shed. Sam adjusted the tiny mic, his nimble fingers steady, despite the thrill of the moment. "This'll pick up everything he said," voice hushed. "If he yells at Rocky again, we'll catch it." Meanwhile, Ethan's grandmother Jean was having one of her lucid mornings. In her small, sunlit bedroom that overlooked the garden, Jean sat propped up by pillows, her silver hair spilling in soft waves around her shoulders. Though her frame had grown frail with the passing years, her presence was gentle and her eyes still sparkled with mischief and wisdom. There was a time when Jean was known throughout Cedar Hollow for her sharp wit and stubborn sense of justice, a school teacher who'd stood up to bullies and small-town bigots alike. Now her memories sometimes slipped through her grasp, but today she was clear-eyed as she beckoned Ethan to her side. Ethan settled next to her, still anxious from his covert mission. Jean squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "You're troubled, my dear," she said, her voice creaky but kind. "Is it about that dog next door?" Ethan hesitated, but something about the way Jean watched him, as if she could see straight into his heart, made him nod. Jean listened quietly as he told her about Rocky, about Sergeant Harris, about the recorder under the fence. "It's hard," she said finally, "when grown-ups close their eyes to suffering. But you must remember, Ethan doing the right thing is sometimes lonely work. You'll be tempted to walk away or stay quiet. Don't." She looked out the window, her gaze far away. "When I was your age, I had to do something no one believed in. It changed me, but I never regretted it." As Ethan left her room, her words circled in his mind. He felt steadier now, as if his resolve was being reinforced from somewhere deep in his family's bones. He hurried outside, and together with Sam, waited for hours as the sun rose and fell behind wispy clouds. A breeze rattled the fence. Occasionally they heard muffled barks and the thump of Harris's heavy boots. At noon, Harris's old blue truck rumbled down the driveway, and the house was quiet. Sam retrieved the recorder, and together they sat cross-legged in Ethan's room, their heads close together as they played back the tape. The recording began with the wind and distant traffic. Then the sounds sharpened Rocky's cries, desperate and pained. Harris's harsh commands, his voice rough and slurred with anger. "Shut up, you useless mutt!" The smack of a hand, the whine of a dog, the scrape of a leash being yanked. Sam's eyes went wide. "That's more than enough," he whispered. "We have to show someone." Ethan's heart hammered with fear and hope. But whom could they trust? The principal, Mr. Carter, was new in town, friendly but strict. The local animal control officer, Ms. Jennings, was often too busy chasing strays to listen to kids. They agreed to wait and gather more evidence pictures if possible, a journal of every new wound, every new sound. Each day Ethan wrote in his notebook, and every evening he and Sam checked the recorder. The evidence grew snippets of cruelty, Rocky's fading strength, the slow, suffocating silence of the adults. All the while, Grandma Jean's health faltered. Some days she seemed to vanish inside herself, staring at the garden as if waiting for someone only she could see. But when she was present, she always reminded Ethan, courage isn't just about fighting dragons, my love. Sometimes it's just refusing to look away. Sarah noticed her son's growing tension. She tried to draw him out with warm smiles and homemade cookies, her lean figure bustling around the kitchen in flour-dusted jeans and an old cardigan. She cared for Jean, tenderly sitting by her side during the hardest nights, her patience born of old family wounds and a deep, quiet compassion for those who suffered. One rainy afternoon, as gray clouds pressed against the windows and thunder rolled distantly, Sarah found Ethan hunched over his notebook. She knelt beside him, worry creasing her gentle features. "You're carrying something heavy, Ethan," she said. "If you're scared, it's okay to tell me." He almost broke, then almost confessed everything, but fear of being dismissed stopped him. Instead, he hugged her, grateful for her warmth. As the days passed, Ethan and Sam felt the weight of their mission. The secrecy, the risk of being caught, the knowledge that Rocky suffered each day, it all pressed down on them. But their friendship deepened, a partnership born not of childhood mischief, but of shared purpose. One night, as they sat in the fading light, listening to another recording, Sam turned to Ethan, his voice serious. "No matter what happens, we don't give up. Rocky needs us." Ethan nodded, his resolve sharper than ever. On the weekend, Sarah announced that Jean's doctor would be coming by. Dr. Lisa Kim, a tall, soft-spoken woman with an easy smile, entered the Miller home, carrying a battered medical bag and an air of quiet authority. She checked Jean's vitals with gentle hands, her calm presence soothing everyone in the house. "She's weaker," Dr. Kim said to Sarah after her exam, "but her mind's still sharp on good days. Let her talk as much as she wants. Stories matter at her age. Dr. Kim's words comforted Ethan, and that night as he sat with Jean, she whispered, "When you act, Ethan, act with love, even if you're the only one who believes it's right." That evening, the boys reviewed their growing pile of evidence. The tape recordings, the photos of fresh wounds taken with Sam's old camera. The written logs all told a story that could no longer be ignored. As thunder rumbled outside, Ethan looked at the stack of proof, then at Sam, then back at the dark house next door. Rocky's future, he realized, was now in their hands. The sky over Cedar Hollow had turned a restless slate-gray cloud swirling above the Miller house, as if echoing the storm brewing within. Ethan paced his room, clutching the recorder in his sweaty palm, its weight more than plastic, and wires a silent witness to everything Rocky had suffered. Outside, the wind tossed leaves against the window, but it was the storm inside Ethan's chest that made his hands tremble. That afternoon, when the house was quiet and Grandma Jean slept, Ethan found his mother, Sarah Miller, at the kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, dust motes swirling around her as she reviewed her to-do list. Tall and slender, Sarah moved with a brisk, practical grace, her face usually soft and warm, but now drawn with lines of worry from weeks of caring for her mother and the new tensions at home. The streaks of silver in her hair gave her an air of quiet resilience, a badge earned from years balancing family work and loss. Her patience with others was well known in town, but lately anxiety crept into her voice when she thought Ethan wasn't listening. Ethan set the recorder on the table, eyes downcast. "Mom," he began, voice wavering. "I need you to hear something." Sarah, sensing the urgency, put her pen aside and reached for his hand. When Ethan pressed play, the kitchen filled with Rocky's cries, the guttural anger of Sergeant Harris, the unmistakable snap of violence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's face drained of color. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You were telling the truth all along." Sarah pulled Ethan into a tight embrace, the kind she reserved for moments when words failed. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen sooner." She didn't hesitate. Once the tape ended, she stood, her resolve settling over her features. "This has to stop." Without another word, she dialed Dr. Harper, the town's veterinarian, who lived just 2 blocks away. Dr. Harper was a woman in her early 40s with short, wavy auburn hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She wore faded jeans and plaid shirts, her boots often streaked with mud from barn visits. Warm and fiercely principled, she was known in Cedar Hollow as both a champion for animals and a soft touch for struggling pet owners. Harper had grown up on a nearby ranch, her love for animals shaped by childhood years spent nursing injured strays back to health. Her easy smile masked a stubborn core. She never backed down from a fight for what was right, even when it meant crossing powerful townsfolk. Sarah's voice trembled as she explained the situation. Dr. Harper listened in silence, then said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes, and bring the tape." As promised, she arrived quickly, striding into the kitchen with a confident air that steadied everyone present. She listened to the recording, her expression darkening with each second. "That's enough," she said flatly. "I'll call animal welfare myself. You did the right thing, Ethan." But Cedar Hollow was not a place where justice moved swiftly. When Dr. Harper called the authorities, she reached Officer Taylor, a stocky, middle-aged man with a square jaw and a cautious approach to every problem. Taylor's respect for Sergeant Harris, the town's decorated K-9 handler, was evident in his guarded responses. "I hear you, Lisa," he said, using Dr. Harper's first name, "but you know Harris. He's a tough trainer, but he's always done right by the department. I'll look into it, but these things take time." Dr. Harper hung up, jaw clenched. "Don't worry, Ethan. We won't let this get buried." Still, the delay felt suffocating. Word of Ethan's accusations trickled out among the kids at school. By Monday, a knot of classmates confronted him by the playground fence. Mason, a broad-shouldered boy with an easy laugh, crossed his arms, looking skeptical. "Why would you make stuff up about Sergeant Harris?" he demanded. "He's a hero. Everybody knows that." Others echoed him, suspicion flashing in their eyes. Some called Ethan a liar. Others just looked away. Ethan's chest tightened with shame and frustration. Only Sam stood by him, hands balled into fists, ready to fight the world. At home, Ethan withdrew into his room, his notebook hidden beneath his pillow, the burden of being the town's troublemaker pressing hard. Sarah noticed the change immediately. She tried to comfort him in quiet moments, leaving his favorite cookies by his door, lingering goodnight hugs, whispered reminders that she was proud of his courage. But it was Grandma Jean who reached him. One evening she shuffled into his room, her steps slow but purposeful. She sat on the edge of his bed, her wrinkled hands finding his. "Do you know, Ethan, the bravest people are often the most misunderstood," she said. "When I was young, I stood up to my own father over the way he treated our old horse. Nobody believed me at first, but the truth always finds its way. Pain leaves a mark, but so does kindness. Don't let the world make you smaller." The next day, Dr. Harper stopped by with more news. "I've logged a formal complaint, Ethan. It's on record now. They have to check on Rocky within 48 hours. She glanced at him, reading the anxiety in his hunched shoulders and pale face. "You did everything right. You saved that dog's life. Sometimes grown-ups are slow to listen, but you can't give up on the truth." Meanwhile, Rocky's condition grew worse. Ethan saw the German Shepherd through the fence, a shadow of the powerful canine he'd once admired. Rocky's ribs jutted sharply, patches of fur were missing, and his steps had grown slow and unsteady. The dog's dark eyes met Ethan's one afternoon, and the boy swore he saw a flicker of hope, or maybe just a plea for help. That look haunted Ethan, fueling his resolve, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his heart. One late afternoon, Dr. Harper caught Sarah in the grocery store. She squeezed her arm in solidarity. "I know this isn't easy on you or Ethan, but you're not alone. You've got me, and now that it's official, we'll get results, even if we have to raise our voices." She smiled wryly, her stubborn fire undimmed. At school, the tide slowly began to turn. Mrs. Chambers, Ethan's history teacher, a brisk silver-haired woman with a dry wit, overheard the gossip and pulled Ethan aside. "Courage isn't always popular, Mr. Miller," she said, "but you have my respect. Don't let the crowd silence you." It wasn't much, but it helped. Night fell over Cedar Hollow, bringing with it a hush broken only by the faraway sound of a dog's whimper. Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the voices of his grandmother and Dr. Harper, blending with memories of Rocky's pleading eyes. He thought of all the small acts of bravery that go unnoticed, the gentle hands, the quiet witnesses, the patient fighters. Maybe the world didn't change overnight, but in that moment, he believed it could. The storm hit Cedar Hollow with the kind of force that rattled window panes and turned the sky a bruised electric purple. Rain lashed sideways, drumming on rooftops and pooling in the gutters, while the wind made the old maples outside the Miller house bend and groan. Inside, the Miller family huddled together, Sarah constantly glancing at her phone for weather alerts, worry etched deep in her tired face. She stood at the window, tall and slender, her frame-tense hair pulled back in a messy bun. The tension in her shoulders had only grown in the weeks since Ethan brought her the tape, her patience tempered now with a fierce protective edge that surprised even her. Lightning flickered, casting wild shadows across Ethan's bedroom walls as he lay awake. He could hear the storm, but underneath it a cry, faint but desperate, rising above the roar of rain. He sat up, heart pounding, and strained to listen. There it was again, Rocky's voice weak breaking, lost somewhere in the blackness next door. Dread curled in Ethan's stomach. Something was terribly wrong. Ethan tiptoed down the hallway, careful not to wake Grandma Jean. He found Sarah sitting on the couch, legs curled under her, staring into the dark. She looked up, saw his pale face, and opened her arms. "I heard him too," she whispered, voice hoarse. "But with this storm, we can't do anything tonight." Ethan nodded, but sleep wouldn't come. Hours passed, the storm finally breaking just before dawn. The town outside was transformed, tree branches everywhere, power lines down, puddles filling the street. But the air felt different. There was a heaviness, a waiting. By late morning, Sarah left to check on Grandma Jean's prescriptions, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He couldn't shake the memory of Rocky's cries. The idea of waiting doing nothing gnawed at him until he finally grabbed his rain jacket and hurried next door to find Sam. Sam, short and wiry, with a head of messy curls and an infectious crooked grin, was the kind of friend who never hesitated in a crisis. He answered the door in muddy sneakers and a look of determination that matched Ethan's own. "Let's go," Sam said, as if he'd been waiting all morning for Ethan to show up. The two boys circled around the fence boots, squelching in the mud. The Miller backyard was still strewn with storm debris, and the Harris property next door looked worse, shingles missing, flower beds torn apart. The garage sat in the shadow of an old sycamore, its padlock glinting in the weak morning sun. The house itself seemed to hunch against the wind windows, shuttered silent. As they approached the fence, Dr. Harper appeared on the sidewalk, her pickup truck idling at the curb. She wore a battered windbreaker over her usual plaid shirt, her hair hidden under a ball cap. She moved with a quiet urgency, boots crunching on the gravel. She spotted the boys and gave a sharp nod, her eyes glinting with resolve. "Ethan," she called softly, "I'm going to the animal control office now. I'll meet you out front in 15 minutes. If anything happens, call me. Don't wait, and be careful." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. Dr. Harper's confidence gave him courage, a lifeline in the confusion. Sam, who had been peering over the fence, suddenly grabbed Ethan's sleeve. "Look, there he is." Rocky was in the yard, half collapsed under the eaves. The German Shepherd looked far worse than Ethan had ever seen him, rib stark fur, patchy one eye nearly swollen shut. His breathing was shallow, his tail unmoving. They didn't have a plan, not really, but Ethan had learned from his grandmother that sometimes doing the right thing was simply refusing to stand by. He turned to Sam, voice shaking. "We have to get him out. Now." Sam nodded, and together they slipped through a gap in the fence, hearts thundering as they ducked behind a rain barrel. Inside the Harris yard, everything felt exposed. The back door of the garage was slightly ajar, swinging in the wind. They hurried to Rocky's side, Ethan dropping to his knees. "Hey, boy," he whispered, his hands trembling as he touched Rocky's muzzle. The dog whimpered, but there was trust in his eyes, an ember of hope that made Ethan want to cry. Suddenly, the side door banged open. Sergeant Harris appeared, face red hair, wild, his uniform stained and rumpled. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his jaw square, once proud posture, now hunched and aggressive. Rage blazed in his blue eyes, the storm outside matched by a storm inside. "What are you doing here?" he bellowed, advancing on the boys. Sam stood up straight, chin jutting out bravely. "Rocky needs help. You're hurting him." Harris's fists clenched, but before he could take another step, Ethan dialed Dr. Harper's number with shaking hands. The veterinarian answered immediately. "He's here," Ethan whispered into the phone. "He's hurting Rocky. Please hurry." Harris lunged, but Ethan dodged, putting himself between the sergeant and the dog. For a split second, it seemed the man might explode. But then voices rose from the front yard. Sarah, having rushed home and seen Dr. Harper's truck, was now calling out, her tone sharper than Ethan had ever heard. "Harris, the police are coming. Step away from the boys." Dr. Harper stormed in behind her, followed by several neighbors drawn by the commotion. Her eyes burned with fury as she held her phone aloft, already recording the scene. "Enough," she barked. Harris's bravado faltered as he looked around at the gathering crowd faces he'd known for years, watching with a mixture of shock and outrage. Officer Taylor soon arrived, his police cruiser splashing through puddles as he parked out front. He was a stocky man with a furrowed brow and an air of careful authority. When he saw the state of Rocky and the fear in the boys' faces, his own anger flared. "Step back, Harris," he ordered, voice icy. "You'll answer for this." Within moments, animal welfare officers appeared, and the atmosphere shifted from confrontation to rescue. Dr. Harper moved swiftly, gently, loading Rocky onto a makeshift stretcher. Sarah wrapped Ethan in a blanket, her eyes shining with tears of fear, relief, and pride. Harris stood frozen silent now, as Taylor read him his rights. The crowd murmured, shocked by the spectacle, but no one stepped forward to defend the sergeant. Years of respect had evaporated in a single storm. As the paramedics and animal control officers whisked Rocky away, Dr. Harper stayed at the dog's side, whispering calm encouragement. Rocky's gaze found Ethan one last time, and there was gratitude there, silent, unmistakable. The ambulance sped away, leaving Ethan and Sam standing in the mud, breathless and shaken, but united in a new and deeper friendship. The rain began to fall again, gentle this time, washing the last of the blood and dirt from the grass. Ethan looked up at his mother, who squeezed his shoulder and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." The neighbors drifted away some, offering words of comfort, others still stunned by the day's events. That night, Ethan lay awake, listening to the rain, haunted by images of Rocky's broken body, but buoyed by hope. For the first time in weeks, the house felt lighter. The darkness in the neighbor's yard had been pierced not by a miracle, but by the stubborn kindness of a few who refused to look away. Sunlight poured into Cedar Hollow after the storm, its golden rays cutting through the lingering mist and pooling across the sidewalks as if the whole town had been washed clean. The air was fragrant with pine and fresh earth, but the quiet in the neighborhood was a brittle, uncertain thing, a hush as neighbors whispered, curtains fluttered, and people waited for answers. The Miller home was unusually busy. Sarah moved briskly from room to room, her tall, slender frame still etched with the aftershocks of fear and hope. She wore her anxiety openly, but her voice when she spoke to Ethan was a comforting melody, gentle and unwavering. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa, his dark hair stuck up at odd angles, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. He watched his mother, wondering how she found the strength to hold everyone together, even as his own stomach twisted with guilt and anticipation. Outside, a car door slammed. Dr. Harper appeared in the doorway, windblown and tired, but with a smile on her lips. "Rocky's stable," she announced, setting her vet bag on the counter. "He's still weak, but his wounds are healing. That's a tough dog you saved, Ethan." The relief that followed was almost dizzying. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, and for the first time, the world felt possible again. But the questions about Sergeant Harris lingered in every corner. News of the rescue had traveled quickly, rippling through the town, drawing the attention of both the local police and Cedar Hollow's social workers. That morning, Officer Taylor arrived at Harris's house with Detective Marie Sullivan, a tall woman with graying blonde hair, sharp brown eyes, and a calm professional presence. She had a reputation for listening before speaking, a trait that earned her respect in difficult situations. Sergeant Harris sat on his porch, his large frame slumped shoulders, stooped, his once pressed uniform replaced by a faded sweatshirt and jeans. His eyes rimmed. Red stared at nothing in particular. As Taylor and Sullivan approached, he looked up with a haunted, fragile expression. There was no fight left in him, only exhaustion. Sullivan spoke first, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Sergeant, we need to talk about what happened here." The neighbors watched from afar, unsure whether to be angry, afraid, or sad. During the investigation, truths long buried began to surface. Detective Sullivan listened carefully as Harris haltingly explained his actions. He spoke of sleepless nights, of seeing his partner's face every time he closed his eyes, a fellow officer lost in a shootout 2 years ago, whose memory haunted every corner of his life. Harris's grief, untreated and festering, had twisted into rage and confusion. He described moments when he'd felt trapped, his mind replaying old horrors, and how Rocky, faithful, ever-present, had become an unwilling target for pain that had nowhere else to go. Taylor, a man not easily moved, found his voice softer than usual. "You know this is serious, Harris," he said, "but it's clear you're unwell. There are better ways forward than punishment." News of Harris's PTSD swept through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. The town, known for its tight-knit compassion and long memories, was forced to reckon with two truths, at once the suffering of Rocky and the brokenness of a man they had once revered. At a special town meeting in the old school gymnasium, a place that smelled of varnished wood and echoed with distant cheers from basketball games, people gathered, faces, solemn voices hushed. Sarah stood at the front, her posture tall and unbowed, with Ethan by her side. She spoke from the heart, her words steady, eyes bright with unshed tears. "We cannot change the past," she told the assembled crowd, "but we can choose how to move forward. Sergeant Harris needs help. Rocky deserves justice, but justice must be more than punishment. It must include healing for all of us." There were dissenting voices, sharp with anger, but others called for compassion, for the kind of forgiveness the town prided itself on. Pastor Murphy, a kindly man with snowy hair and a booming laugh, reminded everyone of the times Harris had stayed late at the food bank, helped neighbors shovel snow, and played Santa for the children. "He has lost himself," Murphy said, "and we of all people should know how to help someone find their way back." A community support plan was drawn up. Sergeant Harris would step down from the police force and enter a treatment program for veterans struggling with PTSD, funded by donations and the town council. Dr. Harper volunteered to lead therapy sessions with him, drawing on her experience not just as a vet, but as someone who had lost a brother to war. She saw the same pain in Harris's eyes that she'd seen in herself. The first meeting was awkward. Harris's hands shook, and he rarely looked anyone in the eye, but over time he began to speak more freely, sharing his fears, his regrets, and eventually his hope for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Rocky slowly regained strength at Dr. Harper's clinic, becoming something of a local celebrity. Children left homemade cards and treats for him, and Mrs. Kowalski, the bakery owner, sent fresh-baked dog biscuits each week. The German shepherd's fur grew glossy again, the haunted look in his eyes fading. Ethan visited every day, sitting by Rocky's side, reading to him, or just resting a gentle hand on his back. The dog, once so wary and broken, learned to wag his tail when Ethan entered the room, his trust blooming like the first wild flowers of spring. In the Miller house, laughter returned, lightening the spaces that had once felt heavy with worry. Grandma Jean, though increasingly frail, sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching Ethan and Rocky play in the yard. Her rare moments of lucidity became gifts filled with soft stories, and the reminder that even in pain there could be beauty. She often murmured, "It's the love we give away that comes back to us, Ethan." Never forget. The day came when Sergeant Harris, newly humbled, stood before the town on the steps of the library. He faced the people he'd served and let them see him, his shame, his sorrow, his resolve to do better. With a trembling voice, he apologized publicly to Rocky, to the Millers, to the children who had looked up to him. The crowd, silent at first, began to nod. A few people clapped, others wept quietly, but most just stood together, united by a fragile but growing hope. Rocky, now a symbol of survival and forgiveness, went home with the Millers, his place in their family forever assured. The sun was setting as Ethan knelt beside his new friend, whispering promises of protection. The town of Cedar Hollow, shaken but not broken, began to heal its heart, mended by kindness, courage, and the quiet miracle of forgiveness. Spring in Cedar Hollow arrived with a hush, as if the whole town was holding its breath and waiting to see what would come next. The air was laced with the scent of new grass and blossoms, and a gentle warmth filtered through the clouds, coaxing color back into the landscape. On Miller Street, the Miller home was alive with small, joyful sounds, distant laughter, the clatter of breakfast plates, and the patter of Rocky's paws on polished hardwood floors. The once thin German shepherd, now growing sturdy and bright-eyed, had found his way back to joy. His fur was thicker, golden black, and glossy in the sun, and his eyes had regained the playful gleam of youth. There was a scar above his left eye, a silver reminder of dark days, but even that seemed to soften as he bounded across the yard, after Ethan barking and wagging his tail with unbridled happiness. Ethan, now a little taller and more sure of himself, had gained a quiet confidence in the months since Rocky's rescue. His unruly hair still flopped over his forehead, and he wore the same battered sneakers, but there was a new steadiness in his gaze, a sense of someone who had walked through shadows and emerged holding the light. He spent his days caring for Rocky and his evenings visiting Grandma Jean, who sat on the porch wrapped in a sky-blue shawl, her white hair drifting about her face in the gentle breeze. Her eyes faded, but Bright watched over Ethan with pride. It was Jean who had become the gentle center of the family, her rare moments of clarity a treasure to them all. Her stories, woven from memory and imagination, had become part of the Miller household's daily rhythm, each tale a small lantern against the darkness. Sarah Miller's transformation was no less profound. Still tall and graceful, her features had softened the furrows of anxiety, smoothed by relief and gratitude. She'd always been protective, but now she had learned to trust her son's intuition, to believe in the good that could come from simply listening. Her compassion, once a private thing, had blossomed into community action. She started organizing potlucks and town hall meetings, gently encouraging neighbors to look out for one another and to speak up when something seemed wrong. Her own pain, her father's abandonment when she was a child, no longer shaped her with bitterness, but with understanding, making her a pillar of empathy in the town's slow healing. Sergeant Harris, once the stoic and feared presence on the block, was a changed man. Therapy had not erased his burdens, but it had taught him to share them. With each counseling session led by Dr. Harper and attended by a small group of fellow veterans, his posture straightened, his gaze grew less guarded, and the haunted look in his eyes began to fade. His hair, now peppered with more gray than before, was cropped short. His frame, once proud and imposing, seemed humbled, yet steadier. Harris began volunteering at the animal shelter and joined Sarah in her advocacy for humane treatment of animals. Together, they spearheaded Cedar Hollow's first educational program for animal welfare and mental health, a series of weekend workshops held at the community center where children and adults gathered to learn about kindness, empathy, and the importance of caring for those who could not speak for themselves. On the morning of the first workshop, Rocky stood at the front of the classroom beside Ethan, who wore a clean-collared shirt and an eager smile. The German Shepherd sat upright, tail sweeping the floor, as Ethan spoke to the gathered children about courage and compassion. He told the story of how he and Rocky had found each other, how sometimes doing what was right meant standing alone, and how love could heal even the deepest wounds. The children, a mix of ages and backgrounds, listened with wide eyes. Among them was Sam, short red-haired and quick to joke, who beamed at his friend with unmistakable pride. Harris addressed the group, his voice steady. The rough edges replaced by humility. I made mistakes, he admitted, his eyes meeting those of the parents and children, but every day I try to do better. We all can. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with gentle applause. In that moment, the community's circle of healing felt whole. Grandma Jean was honored at the Spring Festival for her wisdom and for inspiring the town's compassion. She received a simple silver plaque, but what mattered most to her was the way people lingered after the ceremony to share their own stories, or just to sit quietly and hold her hand. Sarah, standing tall beside her mother, wiped away tears as she watched the town she loved, flawed, resilient, hopeful, begin to weave itself together again. Rocky, now truly part of the Miller family, reveled in his new life. He was never far from Ethan's side, whether snoozing at his feet during homework time or running wild through the fields behind the house. The people of Cedar Hollow welcomed him wherever he went, children eager to pet him, adults offering treats and friendly greetings. He became in time a symbol of both caution and hope, a living reminder that even the most wounded among us could be restored with enough love. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Ethan sat on the porch steps, Rocky's head resting in his lap. Sarah and Grandma Jean chatted quietly nearby, their voices mingling with the sound of crickets and distant laughter. In the soft twilight, Ethan thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the courage, the pain, and the forgiveness. He realized that he was not just a boy who saved a dog. He had become a thread in the tapestry of Cedar Hollow's healing. The story of Ethan, Rocky, and the Miller family spread beyond their little town, retold in neighboring counties, and eventually picked up by local news. Letters arrived from people who'd faced similar struggles, veterans, children, animal lovers, each one finding hope in Ethan's story. Cedar Hollow, once a place shadowed by silence, became known for its kindness, its willingness to listen, and its belief in second chances. In the end, the town was changed not by anger or blame, but by the circle of compassion that had begun with a single frightened howl in the night. And as long as there were hearts willing to listen, to stand up, and to heal, Cedar Hollow would remain a place where even the deepest wounds could blossom into love. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with grand gestures or blinding light. Sometimes it slips quietly into our lives on 4 trembling paws, in the gentle persistence of a child, or in the steady, forgiving hands of a stranger. Rocky did not simply escape his pain, he transformed it into a bridge that brought an entire town together. Through his silent courage, a wounded officer began to hope. Again, a boy learned the weight and beauty of empathy, and a community found its heart. Perhaps that was no coincidence. Because when we choose to see the suffering around us and answer it with love, something sacred stirs, soft but unstoppable. In the tapestry of our everyday struggles, grace still appears, not to erase all sorrow, but to remind us that redemption is woven one act of kindness at a time. If this story reached your soul, share it with someone who needs a reason to believe in goodness again. Comment below to tell us how Rocky's journey echoes in your own life. And if you trust in the healing power of compassion, type Amen for a blessing. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of hope, mercy, and second chances. May you always find courage, and may love in its many forms walk beside you.